I came out of industry. Well, I started my life as a teacher in the 1960s, so that tells you how old I am. And I decided that teaching for the Transvaal Onderwysdepartement under the nationalist government was just out of the question, and I got as far away from teaching as I could get. I'm a maths teacher and an English teacher. I also was a history teacher, but under the nationalist government, they would have put me in jail if I had carried on teaching, so I switched to maths as a specialism for a while. Didn't last long. Anyway, the rest of my life I spent in industry, but mostly in training and educating managers. Right, so I've been in education for about 50 years. And these questions, I only got back into it because of these questions, which started bombing my brains when I sent my kids to school. And I thought, they still haven't got it right. Teaching is as bad as it was when I stepped out of it 20 years ago. Your ladder analogy. The last time, Louise, sorry, I've been sitting on an aeroplane and I'm stiff, so I have to walk around, if you don't mind. The last time I saw Louise, I had my arm, this one, in a sling. It was because I tried to swing from a pole by mistake, because I'd slipped and I grabbed the pole and I couldn't do a pull-up. So it was horrible memory. And I'm quite strong, but I ended up on one arm twisted and it fractured my shoulder. So I saw Louise with my arm in a sling. The sling has just come off. But I was then able to say to people, do you see what we do in grade 1 in Gauteng? And in Gauteng, the average is about 15 languages per class. So that is our reality. And I'm aware that I'm here in the Western Cape. It is different for you. So I must say, please bear with me. I'm talking from a very multilingual background. But I do believe that what we've learned can be applied here as well. But I said to people, look what we do. We take their right hands when they come in grade 1, all ready to read and write. They've got those skills. Their brains, their cognitive patterning is all set up for learning in their home language. We say to them, okay, take your best arm and tie it behind your, I can't put it behind. Take your best arm, tie it to your body. You're not allowed to use that. You've got to take your other arm, take your left hand. All right, it's not nearly so strong, but that's what you've got to learn in. So leave your best language at home with your dirty socks. It doesn't belong in education. And I've heard this repeatedly in schoolrooms. No, you leave that language outside the door. English is the language of education. We won't even talk about the psychological effects of that. But that's the point. We say, tie your hand behind your back, use your left one. It will get stronger. It will, if you use it. Okay. Let's just go back a bit, because lots of the points have been raised, and very nicely, by Vuyo and Krista. I want you just to clear your heads and ask yourselves a simple, straight question. Which should it be in grade 1? Should it be English or home language? Okay? Clear your heads. Decide on your answer. Straightforward answer. And then, like Louise, I'm going to ask you please just to turn to the person next to you and tell them, I go for English, I go for home language, and this is my main reason. So I'll just give you two minutes, please. Just clarify. And you see how difficult it is to get people to stop talking about something they're really interested in. Look at this. And look at this here. And your technique as teachers, when you teach learners to work as buddies, is that when I put my hand up, everybody seeing me has to put their hands up, and that means end of talking. Okay? Now I assure you, and I'm a maths teacher, so most of my studies have been done in maths classes, and when the noise gets too high, you put 2 hands up, and you do this. Everybody's got to put 2 hands up, and you see what it does? It restricts your chest, you stop talking. It's very difficult to talk like that. Okay, so it's just one of the many techniques that we teach. Just take note that you were using the buddy system. Now, if you'd been talking in Chinese, that was okay. You were talking in Arabic, you were talking in Chichewa, you were talking in Xhosa, you were talking in Tswana. Did it make any difference to me what language you were talking in? I don't know what you were talking in. But were you thinking? Were you thinking about what you were saying? Were you using whatever language you used for thinking? Okay? That's the first basic idea. If you were using Chivenda, great. You were using your language as a tool for thinking. And learning starts with thinking. Okay, so in my class of 50 here, I'm very happy if I've got 25 languages. Makes no difference to me. I can make sure that you use your language for thinking. I then bring it together and you've got to talk to me and we interact in English. So that's the basic idea behind multilingualism. But before we go on to that, I want to just quickly ask Winslow to put up some criteria for me, because I'm going to say, if we ask that question, English or home language, at least let's be sure that we know what we're saying. What do we want from a language? What do we want? Why do we make our choice? Which language? And I'm going to offer you 3 criteria, which I say in our South Africa today are critical. They're not negotiable. We at least need these 3 criteria, please, Windsor. Just take them through. We want a system that's fair, a system that promotes good learning, and one that promotes social cohesion. Keep going. So in other words, at least, keep going down, we have to have equity. That's what our constitution is all about, surely. We want a language that's not going to disadvantage any, not a single person. We want a language that's not just fair and that we all fail. Okay, it's all fair, we're all on the bottom level and we all fail. What's the good of that? We want learning that's the best, for our best potential. And we want, surely, the national unity aim is something we all have to strive for, given our horrible history. That is critical. And so I'm saying that's it. Those are your 3 key criteria. And now let's measure up the languages. Let's start with English. And I think I'm going to start with number 3. I think that English does promote social cohesion, simply because it makes it possible for us to have the multilingual classes that we have in Gauteng. I can have my 25 languages as long as we all accept English as a common language. It makes for social cohesion. Okay, but then it gets difficult. And all I'm doing now is summing up what people have been saying all the time. Number 1, fair. Can it be fair to select English? Can it be fair to select any single language out of our 11? What happens when we select one? What does it do to the others? Exactly. When we select English, we are disadvantaging more than 80% of the learners in our country. That's the truth. Okay? What about promoting good learning, let alone optimal learning? I want the best, but even if I can just have it good, that's surely okay. But guys, we know from research, we know, unfortunately, that it takes 6 to 8 years of learning a language well, learning a second language well, either in a proper school situation with excellent professional teaching, or in a home situation which is really conducive to learning a language. It takes 6 to 8 years before we can say the child has got sufficient proficiency to be able to use that language well. Okay, that's the truth. But what do? We take them for how many years? 3 years, and we throw them into English in grade 4. We have all the research in the world showing that this doesn't work on a national level. Why do we think our kids are so clever that they can learn in 3 years what other people's children can't do? Okay? But we've all got the experience. We know from our own research over the last 30 years, it's the 80s, it's more than 30 years. We know that this is a failing policy. It does not work. You cannot, in 3 years, teach a child good enough English to be able to cope properly and learn well, certainly not optimally, after 3 years. So guys, what are we saying? We're saying, okay, English, we can tick the box for English on 3, but we fail on 2, we fail on 1. Problem with English? Absolutely. Mother tongue? Let's try. Okay, number 1, mother tongue. If everybody in my class speaks the same language, then it's fair. Like most of our Afrikaans medium schools in Gauteng. It's fair, and similarly, they do fine on number 2. If everybody in the class speaks Afrikaans, that's fine. And we have some of the best students in the country, the best results in our Afrikaans medium schools. So it sounds great. Mother tongue's great. Okay, as long as everybody in the class speaks the same language. But what happens when we come to number 3? Okay, what does it mean? If we're going to go that route, it means we have to separate our children, apartheid style, into separate schools, separate language groups, and we keep up the same apartheid pattern. So mother tongue fails very badly on number 3. So what are we saying? It's a problem. Let's have the next one. When we ask that question, I think Krista has it summed up. It's a false choice. It's a dishonest choice. It's a lazy choice. It's impossible to achieve. Just keep going. Those 3 key criteria, it's impossible to do that via a single medium system in a multilingual society. It's impossible to do it. You cannot. Okay, it's like saying 1 + 1 + 1 = 5. What's the problem here, guys? And this is where we have to scratch our heads about what's going on with our brains. We're working with an outdated system that's suited to a fragmented apartheid society. Look, the whole idea of one language, it was fine. When we were all in little apartheid boxes, it made sense. Or even before, in mission schools, in rural communities. But here we're sitting in the 21st century, and we're using a single medium. We're trying to use a single medium for a multilingual society. Okay, something's wrong. Doesn't work. We've got ourselves stuck in a box, and we're trying desperately. We go round and round and round the same box saying, which should it be, which should it be? But we've got to get out of the box. We've got to be able to think multi-medium for a multilingual society. That's step 1 before we start trying to work out solutions, I believe. Okay, so with that in mind, I mean, it's like saying, do you want the devil or the deep blue sea? Isn't it? You know, we're to die either way. And yet that's what we're faced with. And then government has the nerve to say, oh, but English is what parents want. English is what they choose. But have parents ever been given the choice of something different? Have they ever been asked, do you want one or the other, or do you want both? Pricer asked, do you want both, in 2000, and that was Neville Alexander. They were ignored because parents actually said, we want both, in his survey. It's all written up by Professor Kathleen Hugh, and it's here. It makes wonderful reading, and you say to yourselves, what happened? What happened to that survey? Why did nobody listen? Nobody listened because it seemed easier to go with a different survey where they didn't ask anything but. Which do you want? And of course people said, we want English. They'd be nuts if they didn't, if that's the only choice that they were offered. Okay, so where does this leave us? Keep going. There's another thing, just to the top one, huh? Right back to the heading paragraph. There's another interesting thing here, because nothing's easy in this whole business of language. I'm sorry. It's really complex, but it does make it interesting. There's a strange relationship between a single medium and the methodology that teachers use. Okay, this is critical. And somehow one has to put this into understanding the whole picture. On the one hand, if you think of it, what is happening? As a teacher, and I desperately want my kids to learn. I so badly want these kids to do well. What do I do when I know there's a language problem? How does it affect my methodology? Do I speed up or do I slow down? Do I get an overview and then try and get kids to think about this, or do I repeat what I'm saying? Okay, how does it affect my methodology? It's one way to put it. How would you say? What would you do as a teacher if you're teaching people who you think are not quite understanding you?
More on the surface, less in depth.
All right, so you tend to keep on the surface until you're sure that it goes further. Well, that's one way of putting it. But I want to just this is a whole study area all on its own, but I want you to just take note of this one. Please, Winslow. There's an interesting study that I've just been involved in Limpopo. Okay, stop right there. We have, this study looked at schools where English was used and schools where home language was used. And basically what we were seeing is both sets of schools failing, unacceptably low achievement levels for both sets of schools. And we scratched our heads and said, but look, why? Surely the home language schools should be achieving better than the English schools. There should be less language disadvantage, because this is what it's all about, language disadvantage. But it didn't happen. And it was only the second factor that suddenly put it all into perspective. Fact is that both sets of schools showed this strangely weak pattern of methodologies. You've got a set of very weak traditional methodologies at work in both kinds of schools, and both kinds of schools are failing whether they use English or home language. Just take the next one. So of course from that first conclusion, many people said, and it's said all the time, it's not the language that's the problem, it's the methodology, it's the way people teach. Forget about the language, just let's get the teaching right. Okay, and then they'll say, yes, home language is there, but it's still you're not getting the teaching right. Then we've got English medium former Model C schools. And this is the pattern that we see. Much better methodologies, very good teaching, very good resources, but we still have this huge achievement gap in the same schools between the second language kids and the first language kids. So if you get the methodologies right, teachers, if we really work at that, we can improve outcomes, but we cannot take away the disadvantage gap from language. So use English, it's not fair, it does not give you the optimal results. Those two are failing. Let's go further just to be quite sure what we're talking about with methodologies. Weak methods, just let's stop with mindless methods. What do I mean? Now think about what goes on in your classrooms. Parrot fashion repetition. Okay, chorusing the answers. Everybody, you all answer together. Everybody, and we all answer together. The chorusing, the parrot fashion repetition, typical foundation phase. High schools, the copying. You know how you copy notes from the overhead transparencies, etc., straight onto the paper. information goes from the notes to the hand to the paper and doesn't go through the head at all. Mindless methods. Next one. Passive methods. This is great for e-learning. Louise. All kinds. We put on a lovely DVD. We put on all these wonderful colored things, and it's so interesting, and the teacher can relax, and the kids just sit, and maybe they listen a bit or whatever. But how much processing is going on in here? Or they just listen, and they're not reading, writing actively. So we've got those, and then a third lot. Lovely. You just keep the level unchallenging. Safe talk. Easy questions. What was the lady wearing? One-word answers. No challenge, no pulling out of what you want. All about focusing on memory and not on thinking. This is critical to understanding here, because this links with language. We've got these weak traditional methods. Keep going. All based on very low expectations, because you do expect low outcomes when these kids battle with language. So that's your expectation mindset. And teaching for tests, of course. We do so well on teaching for tests. NAPTOSA, all their courses for August, we find in August now, and I'm sure it's the same in the Western Cape, practically no sign-ups for teacher development courses. Why? Because principals are saying, you may not go for courses in August, you've got to be practicing for the ANAs. The point is, we've got a crisis in this country in terms of achievement in every single one of our schools, really, our state schools. We've got some brilliant schools, yes, okay, except that, as I say, when people like me try to get the data, they don't like it at all, because it keeps on showing that our first language learners are doing brilliantly in the 90s. Our second language cohort is doing okayish in the 50s and 60s. The school just reports great results in the 80s. Nobody admits that the second language kids are still hugely disadvantaged, even in these wonderful schools. But we can say there are lots of things that affect low achievement. Sure, if you've got no toilets and you've got no electricity and you've got no desks, but not just that, the nutrition levels and the resources, you've got no textbooks. But what I'm saying, guys, is that even in those schools where we're getting these things at a reasonable level, and they're adequate, the two factors that we are ignoring as a country are these. The first one is the question of trying to use one language only, when, as I say, it's impossible to use just one language in a multilingual society. The limitations of the single language medium that disadvantage the majority. Think about it. I said 80%, more than 80% of our learners in South Africa are disadvantaged by an English medium only. I came across, when I first started working on language, a lot of American literature which talked about L's, E-L-L-S. I said, what are L's? I've heard about SLL, second language learners, and English second language, and everything but L's. L's have special programs in the United States. They are considered to be a hugely disadvantaged minority. In other words, English language learners. Right, so if you are a second language learner in the USA, you're an L. And L's are considered a disadvantaged minority that needs special programs, because this is such a problem. And I thought, this is crazy. Here they've got this minority problem. What have we done in South Africa? We have made the majority of our children ELLs. The majority has been turned into second language learners by this choice of a single language instead of what we want, which is what? Okay, keep going. Sorry, Winslow. So we've got two factors that are ignored. People are afraid of them. They don't want to talk about them. One is the single language medium, that we stuck with an outdated traditional apartheid system in that respect. We've got these weak traditional methodologies that haven't changed since the mission school days, and yet we're in the 21st century. So it's these two things that we've somehow got to get to grips with. Let's keep going. Is it because they're not significant? No, we're afraid. That's the honest truth. Let's go. Quickly now, because I've really taken more than my time. Just to give you the basics, what we say in trying to teach multibilingualism, this is not something that you can just talk to teachers about. We have to give teachers the skills. After 1976, when everything changed and it was swinging to English, 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 nobody stopped and said, what skills do our schools need for these multilingual classes in Gauteng? 16 languages, 17, 18, 19, 20. What skills do they need to teach multilingual classes through the medium of English? Nobody stopped to think or to give them those skills. And this is where I think the crunch of our challenge is. What multibilingualism does is it uses a common language, the primary lot. We use English as the primary lot because it's the most practical by far for us and the most acceptable. The teacher, however, and this is a little bit different, the teacher uses only the common language. Teacher uses English. And we think English is reasonable. The next one. The learners supplement the common language with their own home languages. Okay, so they're all using, so every learner uses English plus their own home language to support it. Keep going. I thought there was something else there. Forget it. Point is that we don't teach code switching, because if you try and code switch in a class with 17 languages, it doesn't help that I can speak Chivenda and the rest of the class sits around bored. Okay? It's got to, I speak English absolutely only, whereas the learners code switch between them in the way that you were doing there. You were speaking a language, but then when it comes back to interacting with the teacher, you're speaking English. So you're code switching between your Xhosa and your English, your Xhosa and your English, your Tswana and your English. You are code switching, the teacher is not. Many other reasons why we don't teach code switching. So, I mean, we can pick up questions on those later. But in a multilingual class like that, it's actually just not on. Right, the other thing that we use, let's just have a look. Our methods and our techniques center around three things. The first one is just the use of talk for task. And just what you were doing there when I threw that question at you. That's just a tiny little example. Now we build that into our methodology because it's through talk that you are getting the thinking process going. Okay? And there were a couple of you who did not talk in that exercise, like the lady at the back there with the glasses. I nearly said to you, hey, if I were the teacher, I'd pull you right out here and make sure you had a partner. Because what's critical is that every single learner talks, everyone, in any lesson, any time, to get the thinking going. We use same language buddy pairs, and yeah, before the interaction. And of course, the interaction skills are what are critical in teacher training. Okay. Then the other set of skills is around what we call read for task and write for task. And this is about reading in every subject, every day, every grade, every lesson. Even in grade 1, By the middle of grade 1, you might say, hang on, grade 1s can't read. Oh yes, they have to start in grade 1. By middle of grade 1, even if it's just shared reading with the teacher of the instruction. So you don't just say, my darlings, we're all going to sing what? Whatever. Masitule, masitule. It's everybody, let's look at what we have to do today. And the fingers are on the page within 2 months of grade 1, and we shared reading, the instruction. Add X, and well, not X and Y. Let me get into the right class. Fill in the color of the girl's hair, whatever. Point is that you are reading. That's where reading starts. Every lesson, every day. I'm sure even at matric level, you know how difficult it is for your learners to read instructions. They need to start in grade 1. So everything centers on read for task, write for task. I'm not talking about reading in language. This is all being taught in every subject across the curriculum. And we use by-text. Maths books are on one side of the page in English, on the other side of the page in your language, Setswana. Okay? In your language. Chichewe, English. Whatever. We read first in Chichewe, and then you read in English. You read first in Russian, and then in English. So every child has the text in both languages. Okay? So that's where you are comparing languages in a written form all the time. Reading books, we use a delightful series from the Western Cape. Kagiso, cheap, you've all seen them, whole series, so that every child has the reading book in English and their home language. And they learn from the beginning how to relate the two. It's exactly identical pictures. They're the words in English and they're the words in whatever language it is next to it. Okay, so the other set of techniques is around teacher-learner interaction and getting teachers to understand that teaching is not about trying to transmit information and put it into, it's not about instruction. We've got to get rid of that word instruction. It's not about trying to put stuff from my head into your head. It's about interacting with your thinking and how I do that. Okay? And this becomes the magic of a new way of teaching, when the kids have all used their language to think first. Okay, that's about it. Okay, I just want to show you what happens. Then if we're talking about 2 languages always, English plus everybody with another language, we've got English, keep going right down to the other side. We can say, yes, we've ticked the, backwards, tick the first box. It's not just fair to all, it's not just promotes best learning and social cohesion. If we're using English supplemented by the child's own language, it also maintains and develops the mother tongue, which is critical for a whole bunch of other reasons. It gives us the advantages of bilingualism, and it's using English as a practical way to bring things together. So I've gone on far too long, Louise, I'm so sorry, but I just wanted to, you know, there's all these questions to try to help people argue their point about why it is they want to do something.